Kevin, and I used to work for this fine gentleman here in Mount Vernon at the Economic Development Association of Skagit County, where I learned a very important skill, and I wanted to let Dawn know that I've been complimented since joining Western as having the fastest business card in the West. And I've already gone through 2 boxes of them, and that's something that Dawn teaches very well. So we're gathered here today to talk about getting and keeping the best employees. And so one of the reasons that this has come up is that a lot of my clients are telling me they can't find good workers. So the first thing I want to talk about very briefly is who am I and why do I think I know so much? And that is that I have been a business advisor with the Small Business Development Center since 2006. And during the recession, I was the operations manager for the Employment Security Department at the Bellingham Worksource Center, where we work to put the unemployed people back to work. And that's where I learned a lot of the things that I'll share with you today, because that's the other side of the question. The job seekers are looking for work, and employers are looking for candidates. And our job as employment security is to help them find each other. And as we worked through that process, we discovered that there were some big gaps in making the connection between the job seeker and the employer. And we're here today to talk about how to close those gaps. The 3 things we will talk about on slide 1 is what I like to call acquire, hire, and inspire. First, because I love the alliteration, but secondly, because it pulls together the 3 areas that most of my clients find the most challenging in getting good people. But of course, before we look forward, let's look at the way things are now. One of the biggest surprises that most people find when they start looking for employees is the very shallow candidate pool that we have. We see in the paper that we've got 7-8% unemployment, and yet people try to recruit people and they don't get a lot of responses, or the responses they get aren't really what they were hoping for. How did that happen? Well, I think it happened 2 ways. First of all, we're really lucky here in the Pacific Northwest. We've had a great economy. We came back from the recession a lot faster than most of the rest of the country, thanks in part to the good work of people like Don Wick and the Economic Development Association of Skagit County, and also the fact that we are the beneficiaries of some really great economic activity down in Seattle. So that pulled a lot of good people away from us. Boeing Company has also been doing a lot of hiring. They came back to Washington thinking they were leaving, and they've taken a lot of people out of the pool. The other challenge that most people know when they talk to potential candidates is there's a huge skill gap between what most employers are looking for and what a lot of candidates bring. A lot of people didn't keep up with technology. Some people were out of work for a couple of years and aren't up to date as to how the modern office place works. And a lot of people are not put together in such a way that they can adapt to the way things are changing. And so they're still sticking with what they know, even though what they know has long since left the arena. The next thing that people are running into is a problem with recruiting. One of my clients here in Anacortes looked for 2 months for people to do soldering work and just never had anybody even apply for the job. So there was obviously a recruiting issue there, and I'll talk today a little bit about what we did to help him out and make that successful. Another challenge that employers are having is managing the interview process. What we're doing when we're interviewing is we're trying to choose good candidates. Don's doing that this week, I think. And the challenge is the personality of the people coming to look for work often doesn't fit the personality of the person doing the interviewing. And because there's a personality mismatch, because a lot of generational gaps create these communication challenges, there's a sense that there aren't any good candidates out there when there could have been several good candidates in the room, but they missed each other because of communication processes. And then finally, the whole concept of retention, when you have Boeing offering people wages and benefits that are unimaginable in a small business, when you have companies down south taking every single college graduate they can get their hands on and bringing them down to Seattle with big wages and big job titles, how do you keep people on board? So what we'll talk about today is ways to overcome the shallow candidate pool, the challenges in recruiting, how to do better interviewing, and how to keep people once you find them. So Just before we start, 3 points on caution. I doubt there's anybody in this room that is thinking independent contractor, but a lot of my clients will say, gee, I just need somebody for a couple of hours. I've been thinking about getting an independent contractor. Well, there's been some changes that we really need to be aware of, and that is that in 2010, the Building Industry Association sponsored a legislative initiative to privatize L&I, put the whole department out of business, and turn it into a private insurance program like they have in states like Maryland, where it's just part of what you get when you go buy business insurance. Well, the initiative didn't pass, and to L&I's credit, they went to the sponsors and said, what on earth did you want, and why did you try to put us all out of a job? Among the things they said were, we really want lower rates, period. If we can get lower rates, we won't be sponsoring any more initiatives, and there haven't been any. Well, the L&I people said there's one way to get lower rates, and that's to make sure everybody pays. So they worked with the legislature to change the language around contracting, independent contracting, and who is an employee, to the point where, if we're honest about it, there's really no such thing as an independent contractor in the state of Washington anymore. There are 7 tests that the Labor and Industries Department asks employers to pass before the person working for them can be viewed as an independent contractor. And if that person passes all 7 of those tests, they're actually a vendor. And the whole idea of a W-9 flies out the window. So I caution everybody to be very careful about the independent contractor world, because the downside is that eventually Labor and Industries will audit a company. When they discover a person's been paid as an independent contractor, they'll immediately determine that person is an employee, because another way L&I describes their change is that in the current model there are 2 states of existence. You're a business owner or you're an employee. And there is no in between. You're one of the 2. So what that means is that people who employ independent contractors are found to be employers, and they're asked to pay all the back employment security taxes, all the back labor and industries premiums, and there's usually a penalty too, because they don't want you just to come out even. You've got to lose ground on that deal. The one thing to remember is that while that sounds rather intimidating, being an employer in the state of Washington is really a pretty good thing, because we only have one obligation as employers, and that's to pay at least minimum wage for the hours worked. That's it. There is no requirement to provide 8 hours of work. There's no requirement to provide additional work after the paycheck period ends. There's no requirement to provide 40 hours a week. There's no requirement to provide benefits of any kind, except in cities like Seattle that have a mandatory paid sick leave law, but that's city of Seattle, it's not state of Washington. So knowing that all you need to do is pay minimum wage for hours worked, it's a little easier burden than a lot of states have. The worst example is a client I have who's from Romania, who tells me that in Romania, if you lay someone off, you have to pay their wages for 3 years. So that kind of slows down hiring in Romania, yeah. The other thing that I think is important to talk about here in the warning area, and of course your other obligations as an employer to file employment security taxes, pay labor and industries insurance premiums for the hours worked, and file the necessary reports with the federal government, IRS. But in all, compared to our sister states of Oregon and California, for example, it's a very easy task. All of those filings can be done online. There's something I learned in employment security. One of the jobs that I had there was I was in charge of our what we call business services department, which is part of the service that goes out to employers and says, hey, let's help you fill this job that you've got. We'll help you write the job order and get an ad out and bring you some candidates. One of the things that came up over and over again with employer-drafted job orders was something that the state calls potentially discriminatory language. Now, it's 2014. Most of us know not to do anything really stupid. Back in 1983, I worked for a company that was owned by Native Americans, and so they had met all of their minority requirements. And we had a very old receptionist who one day looked at a person who came in to apply for a job and said, oh, we don't hire black people here. We all know better than to do that in 2014. But the potentially discriminatory things that do come up are quite surprising. there's two areas potentially discriminatory language comes up in a job advertisement. The first is relevance. If you're asking for someone whose job description is to be a web developer and do keyboarding, and you put in that job description, must be able to regularly lift 50 pounds, say to yourself, well, basically are you saying I'd like able-bodied young men to work here? I mean, why is that in there? How relevant is it to the job? But that phrase, must be able to lift 50 pounds, even in a job where it's relevant, like working in a warehouse, is still potentially discriminatory according to the Washington Equal Rights Commission, because you are eliminating people who are differently abled who may have assistive technology that makes it possible for them to qualify for that job. So the turn of the phrase, instead of must be able to lift 50 pounds, is a very simple, must be able to demonstrate lifting 50 pounds. Now maybe they have a crane on their wheelchair, maybe they've learned levitation in Egypt, but the point is, it's important to structure your job recruiting language in such a way that it doesn't inadvertently exclude someone for non-employment relevant reasons. Employment security can help you with that. There's a lot of stuff online, but common sense definitely applies. After you draft your first copy of your job ad, you take a look at it and say, now, have I accidentally phrased this in such a way that I inadvertently excluded someone who could be a viable candidate, but just because of the way I talk, I may make them feel like they shouldn't apply for the job. There's also a suspicion on the part of folks who work in places like the Washington Human Rights Commission, where if there's a lot of language about lifting heavy weights or mobility, are you really saying you just want young single men working here? Because that's another way to do it, is to set up all these qualifications that when you get right down to it, that's what you're asking for. And so there's, besides obeying the law and not getting on the wrong side of the Human Rights Commission, it also eliminates people who could be very good candidates for the job. That in this candidate pool environment, which is very shallow, you just don't want to do that. It's good business to get as many potential applicants as you can. So with that in mind, let's go to the next slide on page 3 and see. I'll make sure I'm not lollygagging here. Okay, good, we're doing all right. And see how it is then that we can make this happen. And this is the slide that starts with acquire. So many of my clients complained bitterly about the current market. They put an ad in Craigslist, they get 400 applicants, they go through them all, and most of them were bad faith applications submitted by people collecting unemployment insurance. And Don probably got a couple of those this time too. And that is the fault of our legislature. Our legislature has not written legislation that specifies the accuracy of your job hunt. The law just says 3 job seeks a week.
Isn't it only 1 in Oregon?
It could be, don't know.
Yeah.
And the sad part about that is that it creates junk mail for employers who post jobs, because those people have no more interest in applying for that job than fly to the moon. In fact, I had employers call me at Employment Security and say, I'd like to talk to you about this guy named Don Wick. He just came in and applied for a job, and I offered it to him, and he said, well, I got about 10 weeks left of unemployment. I don't think I'll take it. In Washington, that's perfectly legal, as frustrating as it is for employers. So the thing to remember is write your legislature about that one, because they really do need to work on that law. So the other side of the coin is that of the good candidates you get, when you invite them in for an interview, they don't show up. Because there's so many job offers out there, they probably already got one, especially if the interview is a few weeks out. So the one strategy I've seen work effectively to mitigate that problem with most employment is to flip the situation over. A lot of times, companies try to pre-sort candidates on the front end. They create a website and say, I want you to put in all your job application information here. And somewhere along the line, someone gets a little crazy. And they start asking for a lot of really, give me 3 references. I want I want permission to do a credit check. I want all these things before they've even talked to the prospective employer about the job. Well, most people would like to attract candidates who are already working, who have relevant job experience, who are going to be good matches for their jobs. And when candidates like that start going through that process, they almost universally go, I've already got a job, I'm not wasting my time with this. So the application process, which was based on 2008 numbers, when there were more candidates than jobs and plenty of good people out there, and they'd all been laid off and they were all looking really hard for work, a lot of those processes are now a barrier to getting good candidates to apply. So this process frustrates the very thing you're trying to accomplish. A lot of people are trying to get to know the candidate before they invite them in, so they ask for all this personal information. Well, anybody can lie. So it really doesn't even meet that need. So with that in mind, I've worked with clients to develop a little bit different process. It really turns the whole old-fashioned process upside down. And what it says is, let's meet you in person first, and then start the process of talking about the job. And we do that with something I call a mini job fair, which is why my middle bullet point is going to the fair. If you post a job ad and say, send in all this information, you'll get one of 3 candidates: the occasional sincere candidate, people who are drawing unemployment and are just looking to fill a blank, or people that haven't worked for 3 years and are applying for every job they can find, maybe not the best candidate for you. If, on the other hand, you would advertise a job fair and you're looking for these kinds of candidates, come to this office on this day at this time, well, number one, the people who showed up. So you know who you're working with right off the bat. It's not a matter of getting some paperwork, inviting them to come in, and then maybe they come in, maybe they don't. So you immediately get more candidates to work with. The second aspect of it is it gives you a chance to tell the candidates a little bit about what you have to offer and have a little bit more of an interactive experience. We call that reverse engagement. Rather than having the candidate tell you everything about themselves and then decide whether you call them in, you bring everybody in and say, here's what we have. What do you think? Oftentimes there'll be some attrition. So let's say 10 people come in, 3 people leave after they see the facility. They see Don's working there, they're like, oh, we've got to get me out of here, I've heard about this guy. And so
that's happened.
And so the other side of the coin there is that the people who stay are genuinely interested. Okay, now we can start the process of saying, well, this is what the job entails, and here's an application we'd like you to fill out. You've already totally changed the dynamic of the job seek. You've got people who can find the place, have transportation, know how to get into a building, and are talking to you. That's a huge advantage over the old method of, gee, I hope this person comes in for an interview, and you never see him again. The second aspect is it's more efficient. Rather than lining people up and seeing them for an hour, each one, and you've got, let's say you get 3 candidates to come in, well, that's 3 hours. Those same 3 candidates can be meeting with you at a mini job fair, and you get them all taken care of in the first hour. Then they submit their application to you, and you've already met them. You know what they're about. You can sit down and look at their resume or the application or whatever you asked them to bring. And then what we've done in the past is say, wait right there, you're next, and then we'll talk to you. And so we do 3 quick 20-minute interviews. Well, now we're only into this 2 hours and we've taken care of 3 candidates. So we've had a completely different experience in terms of bringing them to us and getting the process taken care of. The Boeing company in their manufacturing area has a different process, but in their management division, they have an incredibly difficult to navigate office building in Kent. It's where Longacres, the racetrack, used to be. And they have all their management candidates go to that plant for their first interview because you can't find the entrance, you can't figure out which 405 exit to take, you can't figure out where the building is because they all look exactly the same. And their first question in the interview was, did you have any trouble getting here today? Because what they'd like to know is, are you okay being part of a giant, faceless, completely incomprehensible organization? Because guess what? That's what Boeing is. And so if you can't figure out how to get into this office to be interviewed, you're going to have nothing but trouble going forward. And so that mini job fair gives you an opportunity to do something similar, not quite as egregious, by just letting people find you and get to see you and come into your place. That's a big change over calling people in for interviews. So the reverse engagement process and having a mini job fair generally brings people many more candidates of a much more reliable quality than the old, tell us everything about yourself and we'll call you in for an interview and maybe you'll show up and maybe you won't. It's also more efficient. You just see more people faster. And I think in this sort of instant gratification internet world that we live in, the candidates have a better experience because it's not a matter of sending something in and maybe you hear or maybe you don't. It's a matter of come down to this place and let's get to know each other. So there's a real positive, I think, generational dynamic there. Next is the actual hire. So we've got our 3 candidates, we've gotten all their paperwork, we have a sense of what they're bringing to the table. Which one do we pick? And I think it's the Toyota company that started with this. The first step is to ask yourself, is it so important that the person who's coming to work for you knows exactly how to do the job you have, or is it more important that they fit into your group? And if it's more important that they fit into your group, how do you create a scenario to see how that works? And so again, it can be a matter of developing a different process. Rather than hiring somebody, having them go to HR or whatever your process is, and then hoping to God they work out with the rest of the team, you bring those 3 candidates in and you do a little panel interview. And you have the different people that they're going to work with ask them a couple of low-level questions. You know, what would you do if this happened? Give me an example when you did such and such. How would you take care of this kind of a situation? You've made a mistake. What's the first thing you do? So the ability of the rest of the team to interact with the candidates helps them see what's coming in and helps you watch them interact. What Toyota does, in fact, is they go ahead and they bring all 3 of those candidates in, if they're a little bigger company. And they'd say, here's this person, here's this person, just do a little side-by-side work today, and then at lunchtime we'll talk about how it went. They're not too concerned about their technical skills, they're more concerned with just how do they work with their team. Then, after they have the reviews of those little mini work exercises, they choose one, and that's the person that they then make sure they train for the skills. There's a company here in Skagit County that does that. They hire candidates 10 at a time, and they have those candidates do job shadowing on the shop floor for a day. And it's a tough shop floor. They do hard assembly work. And then at the end of the day, they all sit down in a group and see, well, you know, who was good? Who do you think has promise here? And then they usually pull 3 in for then a week work of job shadowing, and they pick one. Sometimes they take all 3, it depends on their workloads. But they will bring people in, have them try the work out, have the coworkers try them out. Now, the thing to be careful of is that those are employees, they need to be paid. You can't do that for free. But most people find it's a pretty good investment. And there's nothing wrong with saying your trial wage is minimum wage. You know, we're meeting our state obligations to get you here and working through the process. And then the final candidate will get the advertised wage. And I think in just about any level, whether it's assembly or even a restaurant, you want to know how that person's going to work with the other staff. You know, what are they going to be like on a busy night? Are they going to show up on time? Having them come down and do some trial work helps you get that process going, and that's what I call pre-processing. The two-way street, in the old days, this was all one way. You know, we told the employee what to do, we told the employee how they're doing, and we told the employee where to go and how to do it. New companies that make the news with this, like Zappos and Amazon, actually take it to the ultimate. After the first month of work, they sit down with the employee and they say, well, now you get to interview us. How'd you like it? How'd it work? What didn't you like? What do you want to do? What don't you want to do? Who do you like to work with? Who don't you like to work with? And the last question's the big one. Here's $2,000. Would you take that check to quit? The idea is if they're only here for the money, they'll take that money and run. And that's not who they want. They want people that are committed to their cause. Now, most small businesses can't afford to hire somebody $2,000 to quit. But they can sit down and have a nice constructive conversation about where that person wants to be. And having a new set of eyes tell you what your business looks like to them is a really interesting experience. This story doesn't have a lot of relevance anymore because it's so old, but many, many years ago I worked for a purchasing co-op, and the way that co-op worked was a customer would call in an order, a purchase order would be written, it would be put in a folder, the folder would be given to the IT department, the IT department would key it in and create a computerized purchase order. Then a clerk would take that computerized purchase order, copy the number on the tab of the folder, and put it in a drawer. And we got a new employee in one day who was taught on the process, and thank God this young lady spoke up. After her first day of work, she said, "Why doesn't the computer department print labels? Why do I have to write this by hand?" And we all looked at each other and went, "Oh my God!" We had done such a good job of training one another on the process, and you know, it was in the early 80s, very hierarchical time, and we all followed the process and did what we were supposed to do. And this nice young lady who just graduated from high school came in and said, "Well, you know, the emperor has no clothes here. You know, the computer department has the data. They just put it in. All they have to do is put some labels in the machine and print them out." And you know, from that day forward, that's what we did. But that's what a new set of eyes can tell you. And so that two-way street helps you capitalize on that information. The earlier, the better. So that can give you a sense of what bringing somebody on board and using what they've seen in their early time with your company, you can benefit from. It's getting a little bit more out of their paycheck. I would say Don's mighty slow here. Usually he's faster than that. It's all the extra work you've been doing. Well, thank you.
Really good. Good stuff.
So now that you've got them on board, how on earth do you keep them? And that's the part I call inspire on our back page. Now, the easy answer is lots and lots of money. And Amazon's doing that, and Google's doing that, and Apple's doing that, and Boeing's doing that. But most of the rest of us have to work within a budget. And in all honesty, and I think most of you have heard this, where does money fall on the reason people come to work? It's number 3. When people honestly answer, their paycheck is the third reason they're there. The first two are personal growth and recognition. So when a company looks at how they're managing their staff from the perspective of saying, am I providing personal growth opportunities and am I recognizing people? They can go a long way into retaining people by giving them the first two things they come to work for. Now, often people hear that and they think, well, I can't afford to send people to classes, all these other concerns that they have. And yet, is that even what the client wanted? In this case, the employee. What a lot of employers end up doing by mistake is solving a problem the employees didn't have to begin with by creating personal growth programs that aren't employee relevant, or recognition programs that aren't employee relevant. What if personal growth just meant letting somebody leave at 3 o'clock every Wednesday so they could go to a community college class that they've already signed up for or would have signed up for and paid for on their own anyway? What does personal growth mean when we talk about the kinds of things that people can come participate in now on webinars and things that don't cost anybody anything but time, and make sure that that employee has the opportunity to take advantage of those things? And in terms of personal growth and recognition, what sort of recognition do people like? Good job today. That didn't cost anything, but it feels good to hear. And so the thing that a lot of folks get confused by in the current employment environment is, well, geez, if I compliment somebody, they're going to want a raise. So they don't say anything. And then the person quits and they go, well, I knew I couldn't keep them, they were too expensive. When the reality of it is, had there been an open channel of communication that regularly informed the employee of how they're doing, and if it's not doing well, then constructively helping them, is really something most employees, when they honestly answer surveys, put at the top of their list. They want to know how they're doing, where they stand, how they compare. How am I compared to the person who had this job before? How am I compared to the person who's working in the other division? How am I compared to your expectations? And that kind of conversation is something that's not well ingrained in our employee-employer environment right now. And that's one of the critical things that small businesses can do to keep people on. Some jobs don't allow for this, but a lot do, and that is a time flexibility. I often joke that if men had babies, daycare would have been in the Constitution. But fortunately, men don't have babies because we're too weak. The race would have died in the first generation. But what that alludes to is that people have family needs that are sometimes pretty significant, and the employer who can accommodate those family needs through remote working days, alternate hours, or other ways to help an employee manage those other family obligations, it's just like getting a raise. If you can help a person with a family manage child care through scheduling and timing so that their child care burden is less, you've just given them a raise of whatever money that takes. I don't have any kids, but I know people who do, and they tell me they're very expensive. And one of the things I've heard is the daycare is frightening. And so if you can help someone mitigate that cost through your scheduling, you've just given them a huge raise. And that's something that big employers can't often compete with, because that's the one thing they can't offer is time flexibility. If you have someone who's working in your accounts payable department, or who's a bookkeeper, or has some other administrative function, does it really matter when they come to work or when they leave? It might, and if it does, then that's important. But if it doesn't, then why not use that flexibility to keep a good employee? The other aspect of that Hoult Inspire is back to that two-way street, which is, again, periodically, maybe even as frequently as quarterly, sit down and have the employee interview you. How's it going? Where are we missing your expectations? Where could we help out? What are we doing that doesn't make any sense to you? What could we do that would help make your job more successful? A lot of employers are very hesitant to ask that question because they think it's going to lead to an expense. It almost never does. Or when it does, the size of that expense is very, very small compared to what's saved with employee turnover and loss. I mean, we know how expensive employees are to bring on board, to train, to get on task, to become productive. Losing them quickly is the most expensive way to do business. So there's one other hard copy I think I handed out, and it kind of, I think, conveys the whole mindset. And Don will recognize this one because I did this when I was working for him. And what this talks about is the recruiting process, but I think it colors the whole conversation, which is why I saved it till last.
Did you really work with SGD, Dave?
Yes. We recruited them here, actually.
Oh, really? Oh, nice.
And they came here for the fiber.
Yeah, yeah.
And Dad and the owner had a yacht as a condo, and they came in here to do grocery shopping and went, wait a minute, what the hell are we doing in Pioneer Square?
Yeah, they retained that office though, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely, but tiny compared to what they have.
Yeah, nice.
So this was their original recruitment. Thank you for coming, good
Thank
sir.
you. I'll see you in a little bit.
Yes, you will.
Bye now.
And so the first one is the job request that the employer wrote. And it's pretty much a great example of that old school, we have a job if you're good enough to get it. The rewrite on the second page illustrates something that is really important for getting people to come to that mini job fair, and that's to sell the opportunity. Notice right off the bat, the first thing you read on the old one versus the first thing you read on the new one. The first thing you read on the old one is position type, full-time, title, technical support specialist, location, Mount Vernon. The first thing you read on the second one, step up to the cloud. Let's do something exciting. Hey, how about that? And so we spent in the rewrite the first 3 paragraphs promoting the opportunity. The idea is to change the mindset from having a job opening is good enough to you're competing with all the other job openings out there. And you have to distinguish yourself just like you're selling a consumer product. Now what's to me exciting about this, just like this job ad here, Eric really didn't realize the benefit of working for his company that this particular position offered. But when we looked at it, we found ways to sell the exciting opportunity of working there. And when I was with Employment Security, I was shocked by how employers undersold their company. So thinking about it from the perspective that you're competing with everybody else in the county for these good candidates, and presenting yourself in a sales mode rather than a I have something if you're good enough mode. Think about all the things your company has that should be promoted in that job offer. So for example, I worked with a client up in Bellingham who was trying to attract some folks for a pretty tough job in a warehouse. And I said, well, what about your non-HR benefits? And the answer was maybe similar to yours. Oh, what's a non-HR benefit? Well, a non-HR benefit is any privilege of working at that company that most people who work there probably don't even think about, but could be meaningful to a new employee. For example, this company had a very nice little smoker shed. And no matter how you feel about cigarette smoking, if you're a victim of that addiction, you would choose a company that had a friendly smoker environment versus one that didn't. Wasn't in the job ad. This company had a very nice private parking lot. And in a lot of places, this company was in Bellingham, in a lot of places in Bellingham, parking's tough. Consequently, and I think there are some downtown Mount Vernon employers that suffer from this as well. So promoting the fact that you have copious free parking, something the Boeing company used for years. In fact, very much to the dismay of King County, who's trying to get everybody to ride buses. And here's Boeing saying, hey, we got 16 acres of parking, come on down. But if your company has a smoker shed or free parking, this company also did a monthly Employee of the Month drawing and gave the winner a $50 Fred Meyer gift card. And you just need to be present to win. And basically everybody won about every other year. But was that in the job offer? No. They also had some very interesting skill building opportunities. Was that in the job offer? No. So when we rewrote the job offer and said we were smoking friendly, had free parking, had a monthly Employee of the Month competition for a $50 Fred Meyer gift card, the responses went way up. Even though they weren't offering any more money, they weren't offering any more promotions, but they were able to make their point that this is a little bit more of an employee-friendly company. And we all respond when people help us reduce the risk of disappointment. In consumer behavior, we say that the #1 barrier to consumer adoption is avoidance of risk. And in business-to-business transactions, reduction of risk is about the strongest motivator to make a purchase. All that to say that the more you can tell a prospective candidate about the good things that happen in your company, the more you reduce their risk of disappointment. A lot of people we worked on this with candidates. I mean, if you don't like the job, you don't have to take the offer, even when you're on unemployment benefits. But they get concerned if they're going to get offered a job in a company they don't like. Well, you can say no, but people don't think that way. And so when you help them see all the other benefits that your company offers, again, like we talked about a moment ago, how about flexible time for working mothers? Or one company I worked for in Portland gave everybody a bus pass, because Portland actually has a working public transportation system, and the bus pass worked on their MAX trains as well. So you went to work there, you just parked your car, never used any more gas. And so those kinds of things, I had no idea when I took the job at the company. It's like, oh, and here's your, I get one of those, I didn't know that. It's worth $75 a month, and then eliminates a lot of your other driving hassles. So things that often companies do as a matter of course. One company I worked for let you write a check to the petty cash fund for up to $75 anytime, and then they would cash your check on payday. So it's like a payday loan company, right there in your own employer. This didn't cost them anything to offer, but it made a huge difference for working families and people whose finances were pretty tight. And so all of these little things that can be done are what we call in consumerism differentiators. That makes you different than the other places I could be working. And in highly competitive areas like hospitality, that can make the difference between having waiters and waitresses and bartenders who show up for work on time and manage their shifts well versus the ones who don't. Because there's something extra there that makes it worth it coming to work. I worked at a restaurant during the World's Fair in Spokane, where they had all the waiters and waitresses share their tips with me, the dishwasher. I was all of 19. And that was a big difference compared to the other restaurants in downtown Spokane during the World's Fair. So that's the place I wash dishes. So that brings us to the end of this stream of consciousness. So time for questions, lamentations, or gnashing of teeth.
Using the mini job fair as the way to attract candidates, do you still advertise that in the traditional channels?
I would say yes and, the old improv answer. Yes, you would do that because that's where people are still looking.
Yeah.
And you want to add it to your Facebook page, you want to tweet it, you want to use any other communication channels that are available, and you also want to think about where the people you're looking for might be seeking information. Bulletin boards at grocery stores, any place you can get the word out about that, because the idea is it's a fair, it's supposed to bring a lot of people in. And a lot depends on who you are and what you're hiring for, but Skagit County is a very interesting place from a demographic point of view because 40% of our population here is Latino, but 60% of the schools are Latino, which means that in a not real long distance future, this will be a Latino community. Great employees out there, but they don't have a lot of common communication channels with those of us that aren't from that culture. So finding ways to address other segments of the community and making sure they get that job offer out there can really help. And with the Latino community, churches are a great place to advertise. And church newsletters and announcements can bring in a whole new set of candidates that you had no idea were out there. People who are located proximally. The Swinomish Nation is very, very small, but for example, people up in Ferndale, in Whatcom County, may try to make sure their job ads get out to the Lummi Nation. Native Americans have a less than stellar reputation as prospective employees, but all you need is one. And so I think that, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I've worked with tribal groups for many, 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 many years, and it's just important to remember that there are good candidates in every population segment. So make sure your information about the opportunity is getting into those segments that don't share the communication channels that those of us in the mainstream culture access. And again, always keep in mind the potential for a differently abled person to fill the job. We have Chinook here in Skagit County that works with a lot of the differently abled, and they do both placement in the community and also they have their own workshops for different kinds of production. But all that to say that often there are jobs that are a good fit for a differently abled person, and that population tends to be a much more stable candidate base. They don't change jobs very often. Find one they like, they stay there. And similarly, there's a very interesting change in demographics with people on the far end of their employment life. I'll be 60 this August. When my dad turned 60, he was starting to line everything up to retire. I couldn't even imagine retirement at this age because I benefited from the nutrition and the health care of the 60s and 70s. So when I'm 60, I'm in the same physical condition my parents were when they were 40. And that's everywhere. And there's a lot of people that worked in civil service, for example, where you retire after 30 years, which means they're 55. And they're retired. And they're bored out of their mind. And they're really reliable employees. Now, okay, you're probably not going to get a lot of 55-year-old web designers or computer programmers. But when you have a position that meets the skill set of that generation, you get some phenomenal accountants, for example. Once again, show up on time, they know how to act in the workplace, they're not really looking for another job around the corner, they're not careerists, they're not probably going to get a DWI or get in a bar fight, so maybe some. But they are a very interesting population of prospective employees that we just never had before, because people just didn't live that long. We just celebrated my dad's 87th birthday, and he was saying that in a couple of years he will be retired as long as he worked. And that's a lifespan we never even imagined. So there's a whole group out there on the other end of the time spectrum that aren't really being looked at. I mean, the old joke is Walmart reader, but there's a lot of potential out there, and for people with small companies in a real growth spurt, sometimes having someone like that on the staff who's been there, done that, seen it before, can be a very interesting voice in the growth of the company. They can bring information from their experience. Again, sometimes it depends on the market and the business, but you can often bring information from their past experience that's of pretty significant benefit. People who do startups and angel investing and things like that are always looking for someone like that who's been through it and seen it before to serve as sort of a mentor through that process. And they might be out there for a pretty reasonable hire. Again, they're not going to have child care issues in most cases, and they're generally going to be, most people that are retiring now are doing okay financially, so there's not a lot of stress there. I think we're pretty much up to the release point. My email address is on here, and I also put two other websites that I think everybody should check. One is our good friends at Employment Security. Their homepage is for job seekers and folks collecting unemployment insurance, but they have a link at the top for businesses. And they have some good information there. And then our friends at Labor and Industries have the 7-point test for the independent contractor there, and a lot of other information about how to manage your Labor and Industries overhead expenses. All right, well, thanks so much for coming. Let's get back out there and enjoy that sunshine.
Yeah.